story a little bit,
Hmm.
and we changed the title. And finding a title sometimes can be like the bane of your existence. Sometimes it's the hardest thing to do in terms of the creative.
What's going to buy his website style, the man, the voice of fragrance. And it's October, it's spooky season. So, of course, we're going to talk to some creators who deal and dabble a little bit in the macabre. And today we're talking with Steve Bynoe and talking with him more importantly about his book Atrium, but also we're probably going to get a lot of other stuff too. Steve, how you doing today, man?
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm doing well. Can't complain. Anytime you get a chance to talk comics and pop culture, I'm in a good space.
I feel you. I feel you, and I agree. Well, you have it. First of all, we're here because well, you got a comic book to promote, and let's talk about that first. You have a series, and I believe the Kickstarter is for issue 5, but obviously you can also get the rest of the issues 1 through 5. But tell us about Atrium.
So, Atrium is a 5-issue miniseries. It's about two paramedics, Darnell and Naomi, who are tasked with delivering a donor heart, and they're accompanied by a security detail. But en route to the hospital, they are intercepted by a group of deadly assassins intent on stopping them from completing their mission. And the assassins are vampires.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Well, a donor heart atrium is an appropriate title.
I'm
We-
glad you like it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We did some digging because we had to restructure the story a little bit,
Mhm.
and we changed the title. And finding a title sometimes can be like the bane of your existence. Sometimes it's the hardest thing to do in terms of the creative process. But after doing a little bit of research and sleeping on it a little bit, we're really
Mhm.
happy that we came up with that term. And the designer for the series, Von Joseph, did an amazing job with the logo.
Okay, awesome. Now, how did you come up with the story for Atrium?
So initially, this story goes back a long ways. We're talking almost 15 years ago. A friend of ours, a friend of the creative team, came to us with the request to come up with an idea for a short story for a film. I guess he wanted to do like a short indie film, so low budget, something that you can kind of shoot in a few locations and not break the bank to get done. The we set out to do the script. We wrote the screenplay. We were happy with it, but then the movie opportunity never came through. So I was getting into self publishing around 2014, I think. So this was around 2010, 2009 that we started with it, and then we got together and we decided, let's make this into a comic. And we worked on it a little bit. We looked for artists. We finally found one who was a good friend of ours, and we got to the point where we were ready to pitch it. We had the first issue completely done, but then we just decided to go in a different direction. The artist wanted to go one way, and then
Mhm.
didn't quite feel right with the project, and we decided, okay, fine. We had his blessing to go ahead with it, and I kind of like my co-writer and I, Peter Van Horn, we kind of sat on it a little bit. I slept on it, and then we restructured it into what it is today. And then we ended up kickstarting it in 2019.
Okay, awesome. So it's been a very long journey, and it's interesting. I'm hearing that theme a lot. A lot of the creators I've been talking to, a lot of these stories they've been kicking around for 5, 10 years in some
Hmm.
respects, and it's just been a very long gestation period. But I will say this: I probably would bet that the stories are really good because they've gone through so many iterations and also life changes as well. You see things in different perspectives as you get older, especially when you're writing, when you're creating, where something you thought may have been really good and compelling in your 20s or 30s, you get to your 40s, like, that needs more depth, or maybe that characterization isn't real based on what I know now. So I could totally understand that.
Yeah, I think if you look at some of your favorite TV shows, maybe The Wire is one of the few exceptions. When you look at the first season, that's sometimes not the strongest. Like sometimes
Hmm.
that is like it's there, but not all the pieces are there. And
Right.
then if you're allowed to, go through it and work through seasons, the show gets stronger. Seinfeld's a perfect example of that. And in our case, we just had a long time to kind of let it gestate and figure out what we wanted to do. Looked at certain story points and figured out which ones worked the strongest. And when we came down to it, what we have in Atrium was just it just hit everything. We were able to come up with a backstory. We weren't under pressure to kind of meet certain marks under a certain amount of time, and that way you're right. We were able to kind of let certain characters develop, have the story kind of go in an organic way, and not one where you're kind of like forced, to shoehorn it into certain expectations.
Right. I think that's probably one of the hardest aspects of storytelling is to tell an organic story. And we see it a lot with a lot of the movies, especially blockbusters we see now. We're just like,
Yeah.
this doesn't quite make sense, or it doesn't flow the way you think it should. And that's one of the reasons why I so love comics, especially indie comics. A lot of the stories just like you feel even in the fantastic, there's still a reality there that as a reader you really can totally understand and get behind and say, oh, you know what, that makes sense. I see that character doing that. I understand why that character does that or doesn't do that, because it's so based in real life, because the creators are real people and are really looking at it as a real world when they're depicting it in the book.
And also too, a lot of times with indie books, it's not created by committee. So it's not like you have an editor that you have to kind of, appease, and then you don't have like a publisher that you have to appease. If the creator is, has done their homework and has kind of hit all the story beats, what you're seeing is basically their true vision. Obviously, it's a collaborative endeavor, depending on if you have your artist being the writer as well too. But everyone has their kind of like their ingredients that they're bringing into the soup, and when you get to kind of cook it up a little bit, you get to see really what the creators are looking for without having to say, can't have the character do that because we got to sell toys, or oh, we can't
Right.
have the character do that because we need to hit a certain demographic.
Right. Yeah. Understood. Now you got paramedics. Very a lot of horror movies have paramedics in some way, shape, or form. You have vampires, assassins. Were there any inspirations going into, I guess, not just creation, but sort of the evolution of Atrium over the years?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of action adventure. I love spy novels. I like spy movies. Big James Bond fan. I enjoy anything with a good chase and a good shootout. So I'm a big Michael Mann fan. So
Mm,
things like Heat, Miami Vice. I love horror. I love anything with action. I grew up on kung fu movies on Sunday afternoons here in Toronto. Those are, I guess, an outlet out of Buffalo that would
mhm.
play them. I think it was a kung fu theater. So anything that had that kind of like kinetic frenzy, I totally enjoyed. And then being a comic book fan, and reading a lot of Spider-Man books when I was younger, anything that kind of had you on the edge of your seat, those are the kind of things that I drew on. So, you know, Dirty Harry movies, Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, films like The Transporter, the Mission Impossible films from Tom Cruise. Those are all things that kind of grab you, and it's kind of one of those things where, like, as a creator, you kind of want to emulate a little bit of the things that made you, a fan of the genre or
Right.
genres. So it's like, this is my version of dot dot dot. And Atrium for us collectively is just kind of like a love letter to the things that we enjoyed growing up watching.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. I think we're all a sum of our parts, and definitely those influences shape us when we sit down to create as well. So that makes sense. Now, obviously, you've been successful with your previous Kickstarters since you were on number 5, which is now the time is for cooling, funded, but still pledged, ladies and gentlemen, still pledged. Um, Outside of obviously being a successful Kickstarter, what sort of reception or feedback have you gotten from the series so far?
The feedback's been amazing. I did some film work, I guess about 2 or 3 years ago, and I gave the book to the director just to, like, just, can you read this, and are we on the right track? You as a storyteller, and he
Mhm.
read it and he's like, I think you got something here. Like he was kind of like the first one where it was like, oh, all right, you're cooking with a little bit of grease here. And then when we've gone to conventions and we've sold the book to anyone that come by our tables, the reaction has been like overwhelmingly positive. And sometimes just the elevator pitch alone has people go, "Ooh, is that going to be a TV show? That sounds like, it
Right.
could be a
Right.
movie." Right. And it's kind of interesting because when you make these things in a vacuum, you're not quite sure if you're going about it the right way. Like our because I am famous for liking TV shows and liking comic books that get canceled in the first season, right? And then there's stuff that I'm like,
Mhm.
I don't know, it doesn't really speak to me, and they go on for like 10 years, and I'm like, how? Like, why? But everybody's
Right.
different, right?
Right.
Everyone's sensibilities are different, and anytime that we've spoken to people or they've come by the table, they've looked at the books, they go, the art's great, like the setting, and we've had some reviews where an interesting one where it was like the use of silence actually aided the storytelling, and it was kind of that cinematic kind of feel because Peter and I are both screenwriters as well too.
Mhm.
It was that cinematic feel that we were trying to like emulate. We were big Miami Vice fans back in the day, and so there were tons of images of Crockett and Tubbs driving in the car, and just they would look at each other, and that would be a story beat where you kind of get their relationship even though no words are said. And we were lucky because our artist Lucas Filappi was able to kind of pick that kind of stuff up and put it on the page, and he did a great job of filling in the notes. Like being in a band, right? You have your drummer
Right.
kind of set the beat, but he was able to fill in the notes that we didn't necessarily have on the page, and he's made it his own.
You know, I think that is when that's done right, it's like a perfect synergy with artist and writer. And as obviously you think of silence, you think of that famous Larry Hama issue of G.I. Joe from back
Oh,
in the day.
I got it
Um,
downstairs. I love it.
and those of us of a certain age, we know exactly what that is and how much of an impact. And there's also issue of Alpha Flight that John Byrne did. I forget what it was. I have
Oh
that
yeah,
one
yeah.
somewhere. Uh,
Snowblind.
yeah, Snowblind. Yeah. Like those are two, like from the early 80s, two books from the early 80s that really told a masterful story with no words.
Hmm.
And we've seen people replicate that over the years to varying degrees of success. But you bring up that Miami Vice, and again, a kid of the 80s, I remember Miami Vice very
Right.
well.
Yeah, we're
The
dating
scenes in
ourselves,
the
but it's okay.
car, the
Yeah.
music playing, the tone, and how very little words were spoken from Crockett and Toes, but you knew exactly what their mood words. You know exactly how they impacted to wherever they were going to in the story, which is very massively done. So I'm very, that sounds really awesome that you guys were able to get that sort of synergy and convey that on the page.
No, thank you. Yeah, it was great. And we've kind of we've been blessed with some great storytelling. I think Prestige TV, with like The Wire, The Sopranos, like HBO was absolutely knocking it out of the park in the early 2000s,
Right.
late 90s. Even going back to the comic book field with things like The Dark Knight, Watchmen. Like there's been some seminal storytelling that kind of were genre changing, and then even runs. David Mazzucchelli's, I think it's Year One, I think for Batman, as well
Hmm.
as his Daredevil run. There's some really great examples of storytelling there, which kind of take the art form and kind of twist it a little bit and give you more character. And it's not just fights all the time,
Right.
or there's a definite like a wave in terms of emotion and heart and pacing in all of these, and it almost harkens back to like the auteurs of the 70s for films, where it was that big switch out of like Hitchcock and the 60s, and you got these really gritty, heartfelt kind of examples of storytelling. And it's kind of one of those things that if you can have that go across different genres and different mediums, take it out of movies, put it in novels or into comic books, it's something that it enhances any kind of modern myth making that basically we're all involved in right now.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point, especially with the comics, that shift. Because I remember I got into comics really, like, I grew up with comics here, there, but I didn't like get in until early 90s. The Extinction Agenda
Mhm.
storyline with X-Men, like that's what really got me in, and how compelling that was, and learning all the backstory. But learning all of the interpersonal, especially at that point in time with the X-Men, it was
Yeah.
such a family, and it was so deep. Not saying it isn't now, but that's like what's 40, 60 years of continuity that I'm not dealing with anymore. But back then, I could do it. And it was so amazing, the story that was crafted primarily by Claremont at the time, but you had others,
Hmm.
especially with distinctions. And then you had Louise Simonson, who was writing, I think she was
Yes.
writing either X Factor or New Mutants, I forget which one. She was writing, and just all of that. And not saying that comics have gotten away from that, but it's so expansive now that you have so many different aspects. Everybody talks about The Walking Dead, and just the storytelling in that was just, especially when it came out, it was so different from a
Hmm.
lot of things out there, especially this genre it was in, and
Yeah.
how it told a very human story when it came to the zombie apocalypse. And I didn't start reading until maybe right before the show came out, and that just really just blew me away. I'm reading issue after issue, trade after trade, up until a certain point. And yeah, you're right. Those shifts that happen, and it really changed the genre. And I think with comics particularly, I think a lot of those books, those runs, have really been able to give credence and credit, and not just credit, but a sort of vitality to the indie comic scene.
Hmm.
Because with Kickstarter, Indiegogo, creators like yourself really have a platform to be able to tell those stories now. And consumers like myself have a pretty good idea, okay, like these are going to be some good stories, because we've seen all of these sort of genre stories come out as genre stories, but like really comics focus on storytelling. And with a lot of indie books, you tend to get a lot more of that focus on the storytelling.
Yeah, and I think also too, I'd be remiss to not include gaming. Like
Yeah.
some of the best storytelling is in games, like Last of Us, God of War. There are others that I could name where you have such a long time with a character or with the
Yes.
characters that you can delve into their psyche and not have it like detract from the story. It actually enhances the story. You get why certain characters do what they do. Now, don't get me wrong. I still love kind of like the force of nature bad guy or bad
Hmm.
girl. Like those are great too. But when you have your conflicted heroes or your anti-heroes or someone who's struggling to kind of do right, like Rick, going back to The Walking Dead, Rick was always on that edge where he was like the good guy, but then he was like close to being Shane, and then he's close to being Negan, depending on the circumstances. And how do
Right.
you kind of as the character, and then also as the reader and as the creator, how do you kind of like empathize with them and then follow along and see if they make the right decision, and would you make the same decisions?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you definitely, that again, that humanity aspect of it, where even in the fantastic, like the characters are so grounded, you really start to question your moral compass to some degree. Like, which way would I decide? Which way would I go? Because
Mhm.
this character is depicted just like, my dad, or my
Right.
uncle, or me. What would I do? What would they do in this circumstance? And it really offers, or poses very personal questions of a reader, and that's what makes it so engaging.
Yeah, like I think you think of like what your code is, and that's something that we kind of touch on in Atrium a little bit.
Hmm.
It's part of the larger world, but there's definitely a battle between two varying kind of factions, right? That see the world one way, and they're in conflict. And I think of like characters like Batman, who probably is living in like the worst city in the DC universe, maybe in all of comics, and every time the Joker gets out and does something ridiculous, it's kind of on him, but he's got his code that he can't go that extra mile that's to do what's needed to finally stop him, because
Right.
then he becomes part of his rogues gallery.
Right.
I think it was the Daredevil series on Netflix where he said that he was one bad day away from becoming the Punisher, kind of thing.
Yes.
And so that's the tightrope that a lot of characters are on. And it's interesting to see how they navigate, not only through their own morals, but also the challenges that are presented to them.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing, the art of storytelling and all the mediums that it's done so well in. And
Yes.
that's,
Yeah.
as someone like myself, who I'm very selective, and I don't know how you are in in your elder years, how selective you are with media, but I like it has to be good for it to really capture my attention nowadays.
Yeah, there's only so much time in the day, right? And
Exactly. Exactly. It's like you talk
yeah.
about gaming. I remember I don't finish mini games, but there was this puzzle
Mhm.
game called Unpacking that I played maybe about a year or two ago, maybe longer than that. But by the time I finished it, it told a story better than some AAA games that I had played over the
Right.
years. Like, man, this was like you're literally like you're unpacking this girl's room throughout
Mhm.
her life from a little girl through teenage years, college, like first boyfriend out of school, and then ultimately, um, spoilers, she's married to another woman and they got a kid at the end. Like the story
Right.
progression just from
Right.
packing, unpacking this woman throughout her life. I'm like, wow. Like I was blown away at the just how they were able to craft that story in this simple little whimsical puzzle game. So yeah, storytelling is masterful. It really is.
Yeah, I think for me, the greatest example of that, and the whole movie didn't continue on this path, which, like, in terms of the strength of the storytelling, which to
Mhm.
me was a little bit disappointing. But I would argue that the first 10 minutes of Up,
Oh
the
man.
Pixar film, that's the greatest bit of storytelling
Yeah,
on film,
I agree.
with like hands down,
That is like you couldn't help but shed a tear.
right?
Like it tugged at your heart. And again, we talk about that silence. You just, had the music and
Hmm.
oh yeah, that's like yeah, it's beautiful 10 minutes of filmmaking. Like some of the
Yeah.
best ever, really.
Yeah, yeah, and it's stuff like that where it's like you give kudos to those creators, like the animators, the writers, the director. You just go, bravo, whoever did the score. Like it's just one of those ones where you go, okay, you hit all the points, and this thing had more heart than half of the things that are out there combined.
Exactly. Exactly. And yeah, man, I've I haven't thought about that in years, but just it takes me back to seeing it in the theater and how I felt
Mhm.
when it came out and watching that. It's like it's just so beautiful. It really
Yeah,
is.
yeah, for sure.
So, but Steve, I'm not going to keep you that much longer. But tell everybody where they can find Atrium.
So you can find Atrium on Kickstarter. It's the Atrium 1 to 5 Kickstarter. You're getting issues 4 and 5 because the previous two Kickstarters were for issue 1, and then the second one was issue 2 and 3 together. And we did that to save everyone on shipping because shipping for Kickstarters can be a bit of a beast for
Okay.
backers. So you can find that on the Kickstarter page. If you just Google Atrium 1 to 5, that'll come up. You can also find Comix Asylum on Instagram. So it's at Comix Asylum. That's comics with an X. You can find me at Steve Bynoe Art on Instagram. I'm also on Threads and on X. And if you want to find out anything about Comix Asylum in the entertainment void where you're looking at comics and movies and then get a little bit of Atrium stuff as well too, you can find us at www.comicsasylum.com.
All right. Thank you, Steve Preacher, man. You guys, all that stuff flashed down below. If you skipped it and don't feel like rewinding back, everything's in the show notes. So make sure you check it out. Give them a follow, check out their content, support the Kickstarter. That's why we're here, right? Steve, thank you, man, for your time. I appreciate it. You guys out there, again, as always, thank you for rocking with us here, Web Style. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your listening ear. Remember, stay safe out there and be blessed. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, hello, hello, baby. This is your lovely Misty Stone, and you are watching Webster Style with me.
watching.